All right. So, oh, nope, 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 nope. Nope. Keep recording. Thank you. All right. So, I want to make another landscape, and I don't know. I have no idea what I'm going to make. But I know I have this burger that I was making for my previous class, which is all right. But I don't think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to show you guys some simple stuff. Let's create a new file. Okay. So, what are some of the ways that we might be able to create some sort of interesting, novel, unique landscapes? I want to cover a couple procedural methods. Procedural methods are ways of generating content, but not from reality, but through software and math, right? And you can do a ton of stuff this way in Blender, and if you can tiptoe into it, it won't be very scary. You'll be able to take this pretty far. And when I say procedural, what I mean is, like, if we come over to the shading map, and I want this cube to be made of bricks, I can add a brick texture. So I go to add texture, and I just add a brick texture, and I plug that color up into the base color of this cube. And so now we see kind of a brick texture. The way it's wrapped around it and everything is the way the brick texture works. To make it wrap around in a little bit different way takes a little bit more work, but we can handle it. What I'm going to do is make sure that one of the preferences I have turned on is node wranglers. So make sure node wranglers are turned on. And then when node wranglers are turned on, I can just select this texture and hit Control T. Let me turn on screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing. I do have screencast keys turned on, but you don't see it in this view. So anyway, when I switch the texture coordinates from generated to object or to UV, there we go. Then we see that the bricks are properly wrapping around, as we might expect, kind of expect, bricks to wrap around a shape. But this brick texture is not an image, it's just math. And so that means you can change aspects of it, and it just goes on forever. You can change the color of it, you can change different aspects to it. Bricks don't have to be red, bricks can be neon, can be yellow, they can be any color you want. You can change the mortar size, you can make it just a grid, you can make it look like a Minecraft box, you can change other aspects to it as well. So whenever you see these dials, I don't want you to be afraid of them. I want you to say, wonder what they do, and what happens if I change this, and what happens if I change that, because that is the very process of learning. I can change it like this, and then instead of having this be white against black, I can have the mortar size be a lot smaller, and then I can change this to white, just turn down saturation entirely, and make this maybe just be gray. And then we can change this to a different size. And suddenly we're starting to build like a building material, right? So it could be not like a building material, but rather a building, an edificio, a place that people are in. It's not very shiny or anything, so we could change that too. We could turn down the roughness over here. And then it starts to get a little bit reflective, but not as reflective as one might think is coming from a building. So we could take this same color that we have here, and we could plug it into the roughness. And then certain parts will be reflective, and other parts won't. Notice that the mortar is now reflective. I think I want the opposite of that to be reflective. So what I could do is reverse this signal. What's another word for reverse? Especially in graphic design. Invert. And so if I want to invert that, I'll look for a tool that inverts. So I'll go to add and just, what I don't go to add actually. What I prefer to do is I hit Shift A. Whenever you hit Shift A in any of these windows, it means add something. And it always is topped off with a search box. So I'm just going to look for invert. And so here's an invert node. I can just plug that into the reverse. And so now I should have a reverse signal and have shiny areas where I had before, but it's not quite working, so I might have to work on that signal a little bit more. And what's happening is the signal is moving from left to right. And I normally don't show nodes to 100 level students, but if you learn nodes, then you're going to be pretty powerful. So let's come over here to the color converter. So I'm just going to look for color ramp. If I adjust this in the right way, I'm hoping, I can get the windows to be certain windows will be shiny. There we go. So I'm just dragging the signal in certain ways to make certain signals, elements, shiny and others won't be. And so this way I create a complex shape just using a few of these processes. I'll call this material building. And so one thing I could do is I could just take this cube, I can hit Shift D and move this in this direction. I can hit SZ and shape it, but you can see what that does when I do that. So it scales it all out. What I'm thinking I want is maybe a landscape that shows like a city scene at night, right? How could I quickly create a complex scene with lots of buildings glowing at night? How would something like that look? Normally I would only want the windows on the sides, but I think a building with windows on top would look pretty cool. And right now this doesn't glow in any way, it doesn't give off any light. So we can take this same signal that we're generating here and we can plug it into the emission of our object. So if we take this and plug it in to the strength of our emission tab, if we turn off our world or we just switch this to the rendered view and make our world black, or you can see our cube is giving off light because there's no lights in the scene here. And so to make that more obvious, what I can do is if I draw a plane, draw this plane out, this will give off light. Now it doesn't look like it's giving off light at all right now, does it? Because it's not throwing any light onto that cube. But if I render with cycles, cycles is a ray tracer, and it calculates how light bounces around in a scene. So I switch to cycles, now you see that it is in fact glowing. It's bouncing off that plane. And if I want it to render a little bit faster, I'll switch this to the GPU. And so now it should render a lot faster. And so if I don't want everything to be giving off light, if I want it to be a little bit more random, I'll select that again, and I can just copy this color ramp, Shift D. And I can just adjust these signals so that only the highest signal will be the glowing windows. And if I want those windows to be brighter, I can just make this, I can select this stop or this stop, and I can make it brighter by just typing in a larger number, like 10. Now those are a lot brighter. I think let's just keep it at 1. Maybe we'll give it give the windows like a slight greenish blue tinge to make them more like a building with fluorescent lights or something like that. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to, and I've named this material building, and I'll name it building material here. Good. There has been an add-on in Blender for a very long time called Discombobulator, and it serves a very specific purpose. I'm going to make sure it's turned on. I'll go to Preferences and look for Dis in the add-ons. I don't see it there. We'll look for Get extensions. Disk, there it is, Discombobulator. I'll install it. And Discombobulator does some weird stuff. I'm going to move this guy out of the way. Let's go to Layout Mode. I'll just hit GX, move this over here. So I've got this cube right now, or this plane, and this plane is only 10 meters by 10 meters. So I'll just test out my project with that. If I go to Object, we should see it under here somewhere. Add Mesh Discombobulator. It's under Add Mesh Discombobulator. And this is a simplified version of another procedural tool, but what it does is it takes that plane and it will create what's called protrusions and doodads and things like that. It's how we make spaceships sometimes, but we can also make a building out of it. And so the problem with this though is it doesn't show you a preview when you do it. So you only get to do it once and then you have to go back and do it again. There's easier ways to do this with geometry nodes, but I don't want to get into geometry nodes yet. I'm going to turn down the taper and just say, okay. So you can see it made 4 objects here. It made those 4 objects out of GZ, the plane that existed here. So it makes 4 protrusions per face. So I'm going to delete that. I'll do it again, but this time I'm going to subdivide my plane. So if I right click, subdivide, I'll just subdivide it up several times. Okay. Then if I do that same function, mesh, discombobulator, I don't change any other settings. I click OK. Now suddenly, we got a lot more detail in there. Okay? And I can scale that up really big. So if I scale that up really big, and then I just give it the same material as my building material, and then I switch to rendered mode, we don't see anything. Why not? So when something doesn't behave as you expect it to, sometimes you have to think, where am I missing? The mental working model isn't quite right. And so if you remember right, I said connect this to the UV. The UV is the instructions on how to unwrap a texture around an object. But if I look at this new object I've built and I look for its UV under the UV maps, it doesn't have one. So it doesn't know how to wrap around that object. So we just need to create one. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that. And for a shape like this, it might be a little complicated, but we'll just try it this way. We'll just go into edit mode. And we're going to go to UVs, and we're just going to do a smart UV project. If we wanted to see what's actually happening in the UV editor, we'll see that there are no UVs for this object. And UVs are a whole nother world that I really don't want to get into in a 100 level class. But I just want to quickly unwrap this because that's what I want to do. And so I'll just hit U and then Smart UV Project, or go to UVs and choose a Smart UV Project. And what it's going to do is it's like that cereal box right there that Blake has. Hold it up. Did they print it out as a box? Thank you so much for bringing that in. Did they print it out as a box, or was it an unfolded piece of cardboard? Is it empty?
Yeah, it's empty right now.
Open it up, spread it out.
I mean, it was probably printed on there then assembled, right?
Yes. Is it leaking?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Look, I think you can only...
No. You got it completely unfolded.
What do you need? Here, let me pick up the chair.
So there's a seam here. You see this seam? Where the two sides of the box were glued together. I'm going to tear it up a little bit, but that's okay. It's worth it for science. And so under that seam, we see this little bit with the registration code, the ink marks here, to make sure that the printers at the factory, all the ink was running through the printer, through the press. So it was printed out like this. This is a UV map. And when it's folded over, then it's a 3D object. That's all in there. Same thing happens. So we have to make it flat, and the designer who designs this in Illustrator or whatever program they're using sees it in Illustrator like this. Okay? So you design boxes and stuff in Illustrator just like this to go to the printer. It prints flat, goes through red, goes through yellow. You can see how many presses it went through to get to this color. It went through a red press, we get a blue press, a black press, and then they print out 10,000 and then start the process. Does that make sense? So they do it quick. This is you can keep this. And so, thank you so much for bringing that in. I'm sure it just clicked for everybody, and now they understand UVs. But anyway, when I say unwrap this project, it's doing the exact same thing as us, tearing up that box and flattening it out, so that every surface will lay flat. So UV, Smart UV Project, and then unwrap. So every side of every table is now unwrapped and on one surface. Now there's a whole nother world to this, which we'll get into in advanced 3D, called UDIMs, that lets us more efficiently optimize this process, and everything gets more complicated. But with that being a UV, that means if I go back into object mode, our texture should know how to wrap around our city now. But it looks cool, but the windows are really big, right? So if we go back over to the shading tab, we can just make this texture more bigger. In order to see it, we got to see it from this angle, and then I'll just change the scale. There we go. And so, while it's not helpful that there are lights on all the windows, you can see how we've made like texture across the whole thing. And so that's kind of cool, right? Yeah. What if I wanted to actually change the roof so it had the roofs so they didn't have light on them? How could I change that? Well, let's come back over to the shading tab. Oh, we're in the shading tab. Great. Let's use this view. I can select in edit mode every face. So if I go to face select mode, I can select this face, and I can select. It's hard to see because there's a bunch of them. It might be easier just in flat shading. So if I select every face, there's not that many. Let's just select these for now. I can say, all right, I want a different material on each of those faces. How can I do that? Well, while I'm in the shading tab, and I'm in the shading tab here, you can see it says slot 1 is connected to this material. You can have as many slots on one object as you want, material slots. And they don't pile up like Photoshop materials or anything. You have to assign them to parts of the mesh. Currently, building material is assigned to every part of the mesh. But if I create a new slot and create a new material for it, just make it black. I will say, I want this material, which we'll call black, to be assigned to those faces I have selected. I do that by opening up the slot here and just hitting assign. So now those have a black roof. And so that way the buildings look like kind of like buildings. I think what's going to happen with this is there's too many windows. It's overwhelming the whole thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and select some of the faces here. I'll just look straight down on it. And let's just select this face. There's some shortcuts for selecting faces quickly. And I think the easiest way would be to look straight this way, look at it in X-ray mode, and let's just select this way. Now that's not what I want. Let's select just the, yeah, there we go. So I selected all the vertices, and then if I select back to face select mode, then I only have the faces, top faces selected. So then I can just say, all right, assign. There we go. Turn off X-ray, turn on window. Now my buildings all have roofs. What I think I'll do now is just select the first slot and tweak it so there's far fewer windows. And maybe a wider range of brightness between them. Then I'll do one more thing to the scene. And if you want, you can just duplicate this now that we've made it. Shift D, X, or Y. Move this over here. And then select both of them, because it's really low poly. Shift D, X, and then just copy it over here. Could use an array tool as well. So now I've got like a cityscape. And maybe I'll randomly choose some of these buildings. This will break the UVs. So I won't do that. You could make some of these taller, but you'd have to unwrap them again. So I'm just going to say, all right, I like this view. So I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to move my camera to this view right here. Right there. I'm going to say view, align active camera to this view. And then we'll just tweak that camera so it's zoomed out a little bit further and maybe move it closer down to the ground. So this is what that camera sees. But what I would like is this to have like more of a night-like sort of look to it, right? So what if we look out into this like city right now? Let's think of something here. Buffalo. Images. Thanks, that helps. There we go. Let's open this one up. Open in new tab. Open image in new tab. All right, so up here, look how dark the blacks are, but over here towards Niagara Falls, see how blue and hazy it looks? What is that haze? It's just atmospheric perspective. It's just, you know, pollution on a bad day, oxygen and light bouncing around in the air on a good day. We can simulate that at night, and it's simple. I'm just going to create a cube. Shift A, cube. I'm just going to make it big, cover up the whole world. G, S. Doesn't matter how big you make it, just make it this big. All right, and then we're going to give that a new material, and that material will be called fog. We'll get rid of the principled BSDF, because that's for bouncing light off of surfaces. What we need is a volume. So I'll add a shader and principled volume. And I'll plug that up not to the surface, but to the volume of this cube. And then if I look through my camera, you think we'll see a volume? You think we'll see a fog? No. It's too strong by default. It's super strong. So we got to make this density less dense, because right now this is like a fog so thick you would run into a wall. So we need to make that like 0.1. Now you start to see things come out. Maybe 0.01. All right, and then we can change the anisotropy depending on what we have here. So that way light is bouncing around in the scene. It's kind of hard to see right now. It's not really showing up in the way I wanted. Let's move the camera a little bit closer to the scene. And so what's happening here is I made this scene too big, so we just need to change that clipping area. Remember the clipping area that was perplexing some of us? Just need to extend it out further. There we go. And so then once we select that cube, we can change that. The anisotropy is how the light bounces in the light. So I'm going to change my building material so it's brighter now. Select the white. Let's just get it up to like 30. 50. There we go. So then if I do a quick render of that, we're going to render these out as posters really big. So I'm going to change this resolution. I can choose like just to make these numbers bigger, or I can just say the percentage of this will be 200%. And one important thing about this is I always turn off denoise in the render settings, because denoise tends to take away the fine details of a scene like this. So if I like what I have here, I might move the camera up a little bit. G.
Excuse me, Mr. Madison?
Yes.
There's a tagline there saying, this machine kills faster.
I noticed that too. It's pretty rad, isn't it?
Yeah, why is it there though?
That's a script that I wrote that is an homage. Maybe you weren't paying attention. Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie guitar. So Woody Guthrie wrote this on his guitars during the 1930s when he was fighting and helping America fight fascists. And so Blender is my guitar, and that's what I put on there. So let's render that and see how our city looks. So it'll be very noisy, and it has to chew on it and render it for a little while. But when we render it at this high resolution, it's kind of a weird like Soviet-style city, because every building is built exactly the same. And but that's okay. That's okay, because we're just doing something simple and experimenting. It might make for a really cool graphic or something. If I wanted to, if I wanted to be like weird and unique, what I might try to do is let's turn off our cube temporarily, and let's just add Shift A. Let's add a cylinder, and let's make that cylinder bigger on the Z-axis. So SZ. And let's hit GX. Let's just move this over here. I'm going to make it smaller now, and then also SZ. I'm just scaling it up on the Z-axis. G. See what I'm doing? All right. So here's this tower that I built. And let's just move it over GX, move it about to right here, GZ. Good. Is it in view of my camera? Good. Let's move it over here. And what I'm going to do is just have like a blinky light tower, like a cell phone tower or something. And what I'll do to make this happen is its main material will just be a gray. So we'll just turn it down. And then I'll just extend it a little bit further. So I'll go into edit mode, select the face, and hit E for extend, and just pull it up a little bit. So that way I've got this extra area right here. And I'll just select those faces right here. So I'm just going to focus on it, go into X-ray mode, and select all of these faces right here. So that way I can give it its own material. And so I'll go to slots, I'll create a new slot, and create a new material on that slot. We'll call it light. And this time, we'll come over to emission and make like a red light. And we'll turn up the emission to like 10. Right? So then that way, if we go back and look at our scene, we're going to have to make it a lot brighter, or we have to assign it. So we select it here, and you can only assign when you're in edit mode. So I go back into edit mode, and slot 2, assign. There we go. So then click off of it. Now we see our red light in our landscape. What I would do, if we had more time, is I would set this to blink. And so that way we could move the camera, do a fun like cityscape animation where we have our camera set up and we're like moving sideways like this. And we'd have a really cool, like large looking city scene that we could use for our sort of graphics. And what makes a scene like this really start to light up is when we have something at scale where we see something up close, then that same thing far away. And that creates a sense of depth and distance. And then we can turn up our fog and everything to make that even come to life more. So that fog, once we turn that on, will really make things go big. I'm going to do 100% right now, and I'm going to lower my samples to something a little lower so you can see what that looks like. I'll call it city. Let's put that in April 25 projects. Render image. All right, that's all I wanted to show, but there you go. Can't really see the tower, but you can see the light.
So, the landscape, it doesn't have to be something, like organic or natural, it can just be.
It could be a humanscape. It could be an alienscape. It could be a dreamscape. It could be something, a micro dreamscape. It could be the quantum verse or something like that. It doesn't need to be something from reality.
Okay.
So it's completely up to you. If you want to make another canyon and a river and trees, be my guest. But when I have freedom to do whatever I want, then I'm going to run away with it and do whatever I want and be off the wall weird and different. But it's entirely up to you. You have this wonderful, powerful tools that no generation before you has had. And I am excited that you will use them.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. All right, cool. I will put this blend file on the 104 channel on Discord so you can play around with it if you want.